the sharp, echoing smash of a crystal wine glass shattering against the polished marble floor of La Toile, the city's most exclusive five-star restaurant, cut through the low murmur of elite conversation like a guillotine. Welcome back to the channel, my friends. No matter where you are joining us from tonight, whether you are unwinding in a quiet corner of Toronto, listening during your midnight commute in Tokyo, or relaxing at home in Johannesburg, I am incredibly honored to have your presence here with us. I hope you are all doing exceptionally well, feeling strong and staying inspired. If you haven't yet, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. Your amazing support is the fuel that keeps these deep, emotional and high-stakes stories alive, allowing our global community to grow every single day. Trust me, you will want to stay glued to your screen until the final second of this journey because tonight's story, the mistress mocked the pregnant wife, then her billionaire relative stepped on the scene, is a powerful, gripping tale of silent suffering, shocking revelations, and a spectacular shift in power that will leave you breathless. Where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments below. I read and cherish every single one of your responses. Now take a deep breath, let the outside world fade away, and let's step directly into the heat of the conflict. The suffocating atmosphere inside the lavish, gold-leaf dining room was thick with tension, every eye in the house locked onto table 12. Catherine Swan sat frozen in her velvet chair, her hands trembling violently as she placed them protectively over her visibly pregnant stomach. She was 8 months along, her body weary, her heart utterly shattered. For 3 years she had been the quiet, dutiful wife of Christian Cullen, a rising real estate mogul who had slowly allowed wealth and ambition to rot his soul. Catherine had sacrificed her own dreams, her own comfort, and her own peace to support his meteoric rise, enduring his growing emotional coldness and late-night disappearances in silence. She had hoped that the miracle of their unborn child would finally bring him back to her. Instead, it had brought her to an execution of her dignity. Standing directly over Catherine, draped in a diamond necklace that Christian had bought with their joint corporate dividends, was Victoria Vance. Victoria was a cruel high-society socialite and Christian's openly flaunted mistress. She held a half-empty glass of vintage champagne, her dark eyes flashing with a predatory, malicious glee as she looked down at Catherine's simple maternity dress and tear-stained face. Christian sat right next to Victoria, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed firmly on his steak knife, refusing to meet his wife's pleading gaze. His silence was the loudest betrayal of all. "Look at you, Catherine," Victoria mocked, her voice a sharp, piercing ring that carried effortlessly across the silent restaurant, drawing the judgmental stares of the city's most powerful elites. "You actually thought showing up here tonight in that pathetic outfit would make him love you? Look at your reflection. You're bloated, you're exhausted, and you're entirely irrelevant to his future. Christian needs a woman who can command a room, not a sad, pregnant housewife clinging to a marriage that died a year ago. That child you're carrying won't save you, it's just a burden he's going to pay to avoid." A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the elite guests at the surrounding tables, but no one dared to intervene. Victoria's family held massive political sway, and Christian's firm controlled millions in local contracts. Catherine felt a hot, burning wave of humiliation rush to her face, a single heavy tear escaping her eye and tracing down her pale cheek. She looked at her husband, her voice a desperate, choked whisper. "Christian, please. Tell her to stop. Let's just go home." Christian finally looked up, his expression cold, detached, and entirely devoid of the warmth he had once possessed. "You shouldn't have come here tonight, Catherine. Victoria's right. You're making a scene. Just take a cab back to the house." Victoria let out a loud, mocking laugh, raising her glass to the room. "Hear that, everyone? The breeding machine has been dismissed. Go back to your nest, Catherine, before you embarrass him any. I suggest you choose your next words with extreme caution, Ms. Vance." A voice like rolling thunder cut through the restaurant, so intensely deep, authoritative, and radiating such absolute, terrifying power that the entire room instantly went dead silent. The heavy double doors of the restaurant's private VIP entrance had swung open, and stepping into the light was a tall, imposing figure clad in a flawless, bespoke midnight blue suit. It was Bruce Wayne. The entire restaurant seemed to lose its breath simultaneously. Bruce Wayne was a reclusive, brilliant billionaire tycoon, a man feared and deeply respected by every politician, judge, and CEO in the country. He controlled the city's shipping lines, its banking sectors, and its underlying infrastructure. He never attended public restaurants, never engaged with local socialites, and operated on a level of wealth that made Christian Cullen look like a beggar. Christian's face instantly drained of all color, his hands shaking as he instinctively stood up, his corporate sycophancy kicking in. "Mr. Wayne, what an absolute honor. I had no idea you were." But Bruce didn't even glance at Christian. His sharp, piercing eyes were locked entirely on the weeping woman seated at the table. He walked directly past the stunned mistress, his heavy leather shoes clicking deliberately against the marble, until he stood right beside Catherine. The room held its collective breath as the most powerful man in the city slowly leaned down. With an incredible, profound gentleness that contrasted sharply with his fierce aura, he placed a warm, protective hand on Catherine's trembling shoulder. He looked into her tear-filled eyes, his own softening with a mixture of deep ancient sorrow and unyielding familial love. "I have spent 5 long years searching the globe for you, my sweet girl," Bruce said softly, his voice carrying clearly to every stunned onlooker. "Your mother's heart broke the day our family was fractured, and I swore an oath I would never rest until I brought you home. You are a daughter of the Wayne dynasty, Catherine. And no one, absolutely no one, will ever make you bow your head again." An explosion of absolute shock erupted through the room. Victoria's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering instantly against the floor, her malicious smile freezing into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Christian fell back into his chair, his mind reeling as the devastating truth crashed over him. The quiet, powerless woman he had allowed his mistress to humiliate wasn't an orphan with nothing. She was the long-lost heiress to the country's most powerful empire. The balance of power hadn't just shifted, it had been completely annihilated. What lies ahead for Catherine as she reclaims her true birthright? How will Christian and Victoria survive the wrath of a billionaire protector? The silence that blanketed Latoile was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Every elite guest sat frozen, forks suspended mid-air, eyes wide as they processed the tectonic shift that had just occurred in a fraction of a second. Christian Cullen sat paralyzed, a cold sweat instantly breaking out across his neck, his mind desperately rewinding through the last 3 years of his marriage. He had met Catherine when his firm was nothing more than a struggling single-room office. She had been working as a quiet, soft-spoken archivist at a local historical society, entirely alone in the world after the tragic passing of her adoptive mother. She had no wealth, no influential friends, and no grand status. Christian had naively assumed she was an ordinary orphan, someone he could easily mold, manipulate, and eventually sideline as his own corporate star rose. But beneath Catherine's gentle, unassuming exterior lay a profound, resilient depth. Her core motivation had never been the acquisition of luxury or high society validation. Her deepest desire was simply a home, a real, unbreakable family. Having grown up with fragmented memories of a chaotic hidden childhood before her adoption, she had craved stability above all else. When she discovered she was pregnant, she felt a surge of fierce, protective maternal instinct. She had endured Christian's coldness, his late nights, and his blatant emotional abandonment not out of weakness, but out of a desperate, sacrificial hope to keep her unborn child's family intact. She had internally realized that her husband was changing, but she had never imagined the depth of the cruelty he was willing to inflict upon her. Now, looking up into the sharp, aristocratic features of Bruce Wayne, Catherine felt a strange, electric jolt of recognition snap through her soul. Memories, blurry, fragmented images of a vast, gated estate, the smell of leather-bound books, and a tall, reassuring figure lifting her onto his shoulders when she was a toddler, suddenly rushed to the forefront of her mind. The silver crest ring on Bruce's finger matched a tiny, tarnished heirloom charm she kept locked in her jewelry box at home. She wasn't an orphan. She was a Wayne. "Bruce?" Catherine whispered, her voice cracking, her fingers instinctively tightening against his tailored sleeve. "I am here, Catherine," Bruce replied, his voice a deep, unyielding anchor of safety. He kept his protective hand firmly on her shoulder, his presence completely shielding her from the predatory glares of the room. "The people who hid you from us after the family tragedy thought they had erased your trail forever. But a Wayne does not abandon their own blood. You have your mother's eyes and her strength. I am deeply sorry it took me this long to find you." As Bruce spoke, two tall, sharply dressed men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows of the restaurant's foyer. The first was Harvey Dent, the brilliant, ruthless chief legal counsel for Wayne Enterprises. A man whose very name in a courtroom caused Fortune 500 companies to settle out of fear. Beside him was Alfred Penny, the quiet, observant head of private security for the Wayne family estate. They stood flanking the table like stone monoliths, their expressions entirely devoid of warmth, their eyes locked onto Christian and Victoria. Victoria Vance's breathing was shallow and erratic. The diamond necklace around her throat, which she had been flaunting like a trophy just moments earlier, suddenly felt like a noose. Her family's real estate investment firm depended entirely on high-interest commercial bank loans, banks that were fundamentally subsidiaries of Wayne Financial. Her social currency, her mocking arrogance, her absolute certainty of her own superiority, all of it shattered against the reality of the man standing before her. "Mr. Wayne," Victoria stammered, her voice dropping its sharp, piercing ring and reducing to a panicked, high-pitched squeak. She took a step back, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the adjacent table. I had no idea. This was a private family matter. A simple misunderstanding between friends. I didn't mean any disrespect to your family." Bruce slowly turned his head toward her. His eyes didn't just look at Victoria, they dissected her. The clinical icy glare was so intensely predatory that Victoria instantly choked on her own words, stepping back into Christian's side. "You spoke of relevance, Ms. Vance," Bruce said, his tone dropping into a dangerous, whisper-quiet frequency that made everyone in the room lean forward. "You spoke of burdens and dismissals. Let me make one thing entirely clear to you and to every individual currently sitting in this room. Catherine Swan is the sole remaining heiress to the western branch of the Wayne estate. Her relevance dictates whether your family's firm survives the upcoming market audit tomorrow morning. Her burden is a legacy that could buy and sell your entire lineage 10 times over. And as for a dismissal..." Bruce flicked his eyes toward Alfred, who immediately pulled a sleek, leather-bound folder from his jacket. "The Vance Group's commercial lines of credit with Wayne National Bank are officially under emergency review," Bruce continued smoothly. "Consider this your family's formal notice. You have 12 hours to liquidate your assets and vacate our commercial properties." "No," Victoria gasped, her face turning completely white as she fell back against the velvet banquette, realization setting in that her cruel words had just systematically destroyed her family's multi-million-dollar empire in less than 60 seconds. Christian Cullen felt the room spinning out of control. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped animal. He looked at Catherine, the quiet, pregnant woman he had ignored, the wife he had left to be torn apart by wolves just to appease his wealthy mistress. And for the first time he saw her. He saw the immense latent power radiating from her lineage. He saw the catastrophic, irreversible error he had committed. He had traded a goddess for a socialite, and the wrath of the heavens was about to collapse directly onto his head. Christian's corporate instincts, sharpened by years of ruthless climbing, fought through his paralyzing panic. He pushed himself out of his chair, ignoring Victoria's pale, trembling form, and took an eager, sycophantic step toward Bruce Wayne. He forced a strained, sweating smile onto his face, stretching out a hand that shook visibly. "Mr. Wayne, please. There has been a terrible, catastrophic misunderstanding," Christian stammered, his voice cracking under the intense weight of the room's collective gaze. "Catherine is my wife. I love her. I have always worked tirelessly to provide a life worthy of her. Tonight was just an unfortunate domestic argument that got out of hand. Victoria means nothing to me. It is Catherine and our unborn child who mean everything." At the sound of his voice, the quiet, broken submissiveness that had held Catherine captive for months suddenly shattered. A raw, profound wave of disgust surged through her chest. She looked at Christian's outstretched hand, then up at his desperate, hollow face. For the past year he had gaslit her into believing she was crazy for questioning his late-night absences. He had made her feel like a charity case in her own home. And now, seeing him grovel at the feet of her family, the final illusion of his power dissolved into pathetic cowardice. "Don't touch me, Christian," Catherine said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a cold, crystalline sharpness that cut right through his words. Bruce Wayne didn't even look at Christian's extended hand. He simply shifted his weight, his broad shoulders moving slightly, completely cutting off Christian's physical line of sight to Catherine. The silent rejection was absolute. "Harvey," Bruce said quietly, his eyes locked onto the crowded room of elites. Harvey Dent stepped forward, cracking open the sleek leather folder. "Mr. Cullen, as Chief Legal Counsel for Wayne Enterprises, I am formally notifying you that your firm's primary commercial development project, the Meridian Plaza, is built upon land leased directly from the Wayne Family Trust. Effective immediately under Section 14 of the Moral Turpitude and Material Breach Clause, that lease is terminated. Furthermore, a comprehensive forensic audit of your firm's joint marital assets will begin at 8 a.m. tomorrow." Christian felt his breath leave his lungs as if he had been struck in the stomach by a sledgehammer. The Meridian Plaza was his crown jewel. 90% of his company's liquid capital was tied up in its construction. If the lease was terminated, his investors would pull out by morning, and he would face absolute bankruptcy. "You can't do this," Victoria suddenly shrieked, her panic mutating into an unhinged, desperate rage. She stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at Catherine. "She's an orphan. She has no papers, no proof. You're being conned by a pathetic pregnant fraud who just wants your money. She's ruining our lives." Before Alfred or Harvey could move, the heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open once more, and a young, sharply dressed man stepped inside. He had an athletic build, sharp features, and carried himself with an effortless, aristocratic confidence. This was Dick Grayson, the brilliant young venture capitalist and Bruce's trusted adoptive son. He walked smoothly into the center of the restaurant, holding a sealed vintage wooden box under his arm. "She isn't a fraud, Victoria," Dick said, his voice smooth but laced with a biting, protective edge as he approached the table. He placed the wooden box gently in front of Catherine, sliding the brass latch open. Inside lay a collection of childhood photographs, a certified birth registry bearing the Wayne seal, and a flawless, matching silver crest ring. "We tracked the illegal adoption network that hid her away after the textile estate fire 20 years ago. The DNA confirmation cleared our lab 3 hours ago. Catherine is blood through and through." Dick turned his gaze toward Christian, his eyes narrowing. "And as for you, Mr. Cullen, you might want to check your phone. Your board of directors just found out who your wife's family is. They're currently calling an emergency meeting to strip you of your voting shares before Wayne Enterprises crushes the stock." Christian's pocket vibrated violently, the harsh, persistent buzz of his phone sounding like an alarm bell inside a sinking ship. He didn't even need to pull it out to know his life was over. The ultimate plot twist had officially unfolded. The quiet, discarded wife was no longer at the mercy of a cruel husband and his malicious mistress. She was surrounded by the most powerful men in the country, and the battle for her dignity had just become a war for their survival. Christian's phone didn't just buzz. It screamed with a relentless, frantic sequence of notifications that illuminated the dim fabric of his trousers. He didn't dare pull it out. He stood rooted to the spot, his knees feeling like water, watching his entire world crumble as the elite patrons of Latoile began to whisper among themselves, their once judgmental glares shifting entirely from Catherine to him and Victoria. The high society predators had instantly smelled blood in the water, and they were ready to distance themselves from a corporate corpse. "Catherine, please." Christian tried one last time, his voice dropping to a desperate, pitiful whine as he reached toward her. "Think of our child. Think of everything we built. We can leave right now. I'll make this right, I swear." Bruce Wayne didn't speak. He didn't need to. He merely cast a sidelong glance toward Dick Grayson, who stepped forward with a calm, unyielding grace, placing himself directly between Christian and Catherine. "The car is waiting outside, Catherine," Dick said softly, his demeanor shifting into a warm, deeply respectful tone as he looked at his long-lost relative. "Let's get you out of this place. You've endured more than enough for one lifetime." Catherine slowly stood up, refusing to give Christian or Victoria another second of her attention. For the first time in 3 years, she carried herself with her chin held high, her posture radiating the innate, quiet dignity of her true heritage. As she walked past Victoria, the mistress shrunk back against the wall, her hands clawing at her own face in a state of absolute paralyzed terror. Supported by Bruce and Dick, Catherine walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the wreckage of her marriage and the social circle that had mocked her. They stepped out into the cool evening air, where a fleet of sleek, armored black town cars stood idling at the curb, their security details standing at absolute attention. Alfred opened the door to the lead vehicle with a gentle, reassuring nod. "Welcome home, Miss Catherine," Alfred murmured. As the convoy tore through the neon-lit streets of the city, heading toward the massive iron-gated Wayne estate on the northern cliffs, Catherine sat in the plush leather interior next to Bruce. The silent tension inside the vehicle was different now. It wasn't the suffocating, anxious dread she felt with Christian, but a profound, emotional weight of a family trying to piece together a shattered past. "Where have you been all these years, Bruce?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling slightly as she looked down at the silver crest ring Dick had placed in her hands. "My adoptive mother told me I was born in a small village upstate. She never mentioned the Wayne family." Bruce sighed, a deeply human weathered sound that revealed the immense burden he had carried for half a decade. "Your mother was my sister, Catherine. 20 years ago, during the hostile takeover of our textile assets, a deliberate, catastrophic fire destroyed her estate. We were told no one survived. But someone very close to our inner circle, secretly pulled you from the ash, forged your adoption records, and hid you away in the public system to ensure you would never claim your rightful shares of the family trust." Catherine's breath hitched. "Who would do that?" "We are still uncovering the depth of the paper trail," Bruce replied, his eyes flashing with a dangerous, calculating light. "But the false clues led us through a labyrinth of shell companies and corrupted public records. Every time we got close, the trail went cold. It wasn't until Christian's firm attempted to file the public registry documents for the Meridian Plaza project that your original locked bloodline trust was flagged by our automated legal monitors. Christian didn't know it, but his greed is the exact thread that allowed us to pull you out of the dark." The car passed through the towering limestone pillars of the Wayne Manor, the sprawling historical estate rising against the night sky like an impenetrable fortress. As Catherine was escorted into the grand, warmth-filled foyer, she felt a profound wave of relief wash over her body, the protective maternal instinct inside her chest finally settling into a sense of true security. But the victory wasn't complete. Over the next 3 days, the tension across the city escalated to a fever pitch. Harvey Dent unleashed a relentless, multi-layered legal assault against Christian Cullen's firm. Marital asset freezes were put into effect, locking Christian out of his personal banking accounts, his corporate credit lines, and the very mansion Catherine had lived in. Desperate and drowning in debt, Christian attempted to patch together a defense, turning to Victoria's family for financial backing. But the Vance Group was facing its own extinction. The emergency audit by Wayne Financial had triggered a massive run on their commercial banks. On the 4th morning, a mysterious, unmarked legal package arrived at the Wayne estate, addressed directly to Catherine. Dick Grayson brought it into the sunlit morning conservatory where Catherine was resting. Inside the package was a series of older, encrypted digital drives and a handwritten note from an anonymous whistleblower within Christian's own legal team. The files didn't just contain proof of Christian's infidelity or corporate negligence. They contained a series of deeply disturbing private communications between Christian and an unknown third party dating back to before he had even met Catherine. The documents revealed a terrifying truth. Christian's meeting with Catherine 3 years ago hadn't been an accident at all. He had been intentionally guided to her by someone who knew exactly who she was, using her as an oblivious pawn to eventually gain access to the dormant Wayne trust funds tied to her bloodline. The real betrayal wasn't just a broken marriage or a cruel mistress at a restaurant table. It was a calculated, lifelong conspiracy designed to exploit her vulnerability from the very beginning. Who was the phantom master pulling Christian's strings? And how far were they willing to go to protect their secrets now that the Wayne family had reclaimed her? The sunlit glass of the conservatory suddenly felt like a brittle shield against a cold, creeping horror. Catherine stared at the decrypted communication logs laid out across the marble table, her hand resting heavily on her pregnant stomach as a sickening wave of realization washed over her. Dick Grayson stood beside her, his jaw tightly clenched, his eyes tracking the digital paper trail displayed on his tablet. The lines of text before them were undeniable. 3 years ago, when Christian had accidentally spilled his coffee on Catherine's archival documents at the Historical Society, it hadn't been a clumsy meet-cute. It had been a cold, calculated hit. "He knew," Catherine whispered, her voice trembling as tears of absolute betrayal pooled in her eyes. From the very first day Christian knew who I was. He didn't marry me because he loved me. He married me because I was a key to a vault. It's worse than that, Catherine, Dick said, his voice dropping into a dark, urgent register. He tapped the screen, bringing up a series of heavily encrypted bank routing numbers attached to the messages. Christian didn't discover you on his own. He didn't have the resources or the intelligence to crack the forged adoption files. Someone fed him your location. Someone who has been tracking you since the day of the estate fire 20 years ago. Catherine forced herself to breathe through the sudden constriction in her chest, the emotional weight of her past colliding violently with the present. Who, Dick? Who could have known? Before Dick could answer, the heavy oak doors of the conservatory swung open and Bruce Wayne stepped inside. His face was a mask of absolute unyielding fury, a stark contrast to the calm, protective warmth he had shown Catherine since rescuing her from the restaurant. In his hand he held a red secure line phone which he slammed onto the table. "Harvey just left the Federal Repository," Bruce said, his voice vibrating with a dangerous, low frequency that made the glass panels of the greenhouse rattle. The forensic audit on Christian's firm didn't just uncover hidden assets. It uncovered the identity of the primary silent partner who funded Christian's rise from a single-room office to a multi-million-dollar real estate firm. Bruce looked directly into Catherine's eyes, the sorrow in his gaze piercing straight to her soul. The person who gave Christian the capital to build the Meridian Plaza, the person who instructed him to find you, marry you, and keep you isolated until the Wayne Trust matured, is Arthur Sterling. The name hit the room like a sonic boom. Arthur Sterling, the veteran, trusted legal counsel who had managed the Wayne family estate for 3 generations. The quiet, unassuming old man who had sat at their family dinners, who had held Catherine when she was a baby, and who had supposedly spent the last 5 years helping Bruce search the globe for his lost niece. Arthur. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the ultimate, game-changing twist shattered the final remnants of her reality. No. He was my mother's closest friend. He wept at her funeral. He wept because his victory was almost complete, Bruce growled, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the edge of the table. Arthur didn't just hide you away after the fire, Catherine. He engineered the fire. He systematically eliminated your mother's branch of the family to seize control of the Western Textile Trusts. But under the strict, hard-coded biometric protocols of the Wayne legacy, the trust could only be fully liquidated if a direct bloodline heir signed the final transfer documents upon their 25th birthday, or if that heir passed away while married, leaving their assets to a spouse who had already signed a prearranged corporate proxy. The puzzle pieces fell into place with a terrifying, lethal precision. Christian Cullen was never meant to be a permanent billionaire. He was a disposable proxy. Arthur had chosen a greedy, easily manipulated social climber, guided him to Catherine and ensured they were married. Christian had already signed the secret proxy forms over to Arthur's shell companies months ago, completely unaware that he was just a lamb being led to the slaughter. And the clock was ticking. Catherine's 25th birthday was less than a month away, and she was heavily pregnant. Suddenly, Dick's tablet flashed with a violent crimson alert banner. The internal security network of Wayne Manor timed with a low, rhythmic warning pulse. "Bruce, we have a breach," Dick stated instantly, his fingers flying across the screen as he brought up the perimeter camera feeds. "It's not an attack. It's Christian. He just smashed his vehicle through the secondary service gate. He's completely unhinged." On the monitor, Christian's luxury SUV lay crumpled against the iron-reinforced pillars of the lower gardens. Christian had stumbled out of the driver's seat, his clothes disheveled, his face bloody from the airbag deployment, a heavy manila folder clutched frantically in his hand. He was screaming toward the manor windows, surrounded by private security guards who had their weapons drawn but were holding their fire under Alfred's strict protocols. "Let me see her." Christian's muffled, desperate voice echoed through the security feed. "Catherine, you have to listen to me. They're going to kill me. Arthur's going to kill us both. I have the original signatures. I have the truth." Before Bruce or Dick could move to intercept him, a sudden, deafening crack echoed from the lower gardens. Through the security camera feed, Christian's body violently jolted. A single high-caliber sniper round had pierced through the rear window of his crumpled vehicle, striking him squarely in the shoulder. He collapsed onto the manicured lawn, the manila folder scattering in the wind as a dark crimson stain rapidly bloomed across his shirt. From the tree line bordering the Wayne estate, two unmarked black tactical vehicles breached the perimeter, their headlights cutting through the morning mist like the eyes of predatory wolves. Arthur Sterling wasn't waiting for the trust to mature anymore. The real betrayal had been exposed, the stakes were at their absolute highest, and the architect was moving to eliminate every single witness before the sun could set. The sharp echoing crack of the sniper rifle tore through the morning peace of the estate, shattering the glass panels of the conservatory overhead in a violent shower of glittering shards. "Get down!" Bruce roared, his instincts moving with lethal instantaneous precision. He lunged across the marble table, throwing his massive frame over Catherine to shield her from the falling glass and any follow-up trajectory. Dick Grayson was already in motion, drawing a compact tactical firearm from his waistband as he kicked the heavy mahogany table onto its side, creating a makeshift ballistic barrier. The internal security klaxons of Wayne Manor completely changed pitch, shifting from a warning pulse into a deafening, continuous wail of absolute lockdown. "Alfred! Status!" Dick shouted into his wrist comms, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled garden through the shattered conservatory frame. "Multiple armed hostiles breaching the northern perimeter, Master Dick." Alfred's voice crackled through the static, urgent but remarkably steady. "They are utilizing tactical jamming equipment. The main security grid is losing power. I am attempting to reroute emergency backup to the panic bunker now, but you must move immediately." Down on the blood-stained lawn, Christian Cullen lay writhing in absolute agony, his hands clutching his shattered shoulder as the dark crimson stain spread across the grass. The manila folder he had carried had burst open, its contents, the original forged signatures and corporate proxy agreements, swept up by the wind, scattering across the driveway like autumn leaves. He was completely helpless, caught in the crossfire of the very monster he had served. Before the security team could drag Christian to safety, the two unmarked black tactical vehicles tore across the manicured lawn, their tires ripping deep trenches into the earth. The doors flew open and 6 heavily armed mercenaries, clad in sterile black tactical gear without insignias, deployed with military precision. They began unleashing a relentless barrage of suppressive gunfire toward the manor's lower windows, systematically pinned down the Wayne security details. "They aren't here to kidnap anyone," Bruce hissed, his eyes dark with a cold, terrifying clarity as he helped Catherine to her feet beneath the cover of the overturned table. "Arthur knows his legal empire is dead. He's burning the evidence. If Catherine dies before her birthday, the pre-staged proxy default automatically triggers across international shell companies. He's here for an execution." Catherine pressed her back against the solid wood of the table, her hands clutching her pregnant stomach as a sharp, sudden wave of physical exhaustion and stress-induced pain rippled through her abdomen. She gasped, her face draining of what little color it had left. The sheer terror of the situation wasn't just threatening her life, it was threatening the life of her unborn child. "Bruce." Catherine choked out, her breath shallow, her fingers tightening around his sleeve like a vice. "The baby. Something is wrong." Bruce's expression softened for a fraction of a second, a profound, agonizing depth of protective love crossing his features before hardening back into iron resolve. He looked at Dick. "Take her through the service tunnels beneath the wine cellar. Get her to the secure medical bay in the lower bunker. Alfred has a localized power grid down there. I'll hold the foyer and buy you the time." "Bruce, no, there are too many of them," Dick argued, his eyes locked on the advancing tactical teams outside. "Move, Dick. That is an order," Bruce commanded, his voice carrying the absolute unyielding authority of a commander in the field. Dick didn't hesitate another second. He scooped Catherine up into his arms, using his athletic frame to keep her low and shielded as another volley of gunfire shattered the remaining glass panels above them. He sprinted out of the crumbling conservatory, tearing down the dark, twisting corridors of the manor's eastern wing. The journey down into the belly of the house felt like a descent into absolute despair. The lights overhead flickered wildly before dying completely, plunging the grand hallway into an eerie, shadow-filled darkness lit only by the red strobe of the emergency backup beacons. Catherine clung to Dick's neck, every heavy thud of his boots against the floorboards echoing like a countdown timer. She could hear the distant, terrifying sound of heavy gunfire booming from the grand foyer behind them. Bruce was engaging the wolves, fighting alone in the dark to preserve the last remnant of his sister's bloodline. They reached the heavy steel door of the wine cellar, Dick kicking it open and descending the stone steps into the damp, cold underground air. But just as they reached the entrance of the narrow service tunnel that led to the secure medical bunker, a heavy, metallic click resonated from the darkness ahead. The beam of a high-intensity tactical flashlight cut through the damp air, blinding them instantly. "That is quite far enough, Richard," a calm, chillingly familiar voice purred from behind the light. The light shifted slightly, illuminating the weathered, aristocratic face of Arthur Sterling. He stood inside the concrete tunnel entrance, wearing a dark cashmere overcoat, a silenced pistol held firmly in his gloved hand. Behind him stood two massive mercenaries, their weapons raised and aligned perfectly with Dick's chest. The trap was completely closed. The house was compromised, the backup power was fading, and the mastermind himself was standing in the dark, waiting to pull the final cord. Catherine looked at the cold barrel of the gun, her body shivering from the damp cold and the physical agony of her pregnancy, realizing with absolute terror that they were completely out of exits. The damp, suffocating darkness of the underground tunnel pressed in from all sides. Arthur Sterling's flashlight beam danced across Catherine's pale face, casting long, monstrous shadows against the weeping concrete walls. "You always were too sentimental, Richard," Arthur murmured, his voice maintaining that soft, grandfatherly cadence that now made Catherine's skin crawl with pure revulsion. He leveled the silenced pistol directly at Dick's forehead. "Setting up a medical bay down here for her. A touching sentiment, but a completely futile one. Put her down on the floor gently. If you move so much as an inch toward your waistband, my associates will turn this cellar into a tomb." Dick slowly, deliberately lowered his weight, allowing Catherine's feet to touch the cold stone floor. He kept his body positioned slightly in front of hers, his muscles coiled like a steel spring, his eyes analyzing the mercenary positions with lethal calculations. He was looking for an opening, a fraction of a second, but with two automatic rifles and a pistol trained on them in a narrow bottleneck, the math was merciless. Catherine leaned heavily against the damp wall, her hands locked over her stomach. A sharp, localized cramp flared through her abdomen, but as she looked at Arthur, the man who had murdered her mother, who had stolen her childhood, and who was now standing in the dark trying to erase her baby's future, something inside her soul snapped. The paralyzing terror that had held her captive since the restaurant suddenly burned away, replaced by an ancient, unyielding Wayne fury. She stood up straight, pulling herself out from behind Dick's shadow. She looked Arthur dead in the eyes, her voice completely shedding its weakness, cutting through the damp chill like a razor blade. "You think you've won, Arthur?" Catherine whispered, a cold, defiant smile touching her lips. "You think killing me fixes the paper trail? Your lawyer. You forgot the first rule of a bloodline trust." Arthur's eyebrows knitted together in slight irritation, the barrel of his gun dipping a fraction of an inch. "I wrote the trust, Catherine. There is nothing you can tell me about its execution." "You wrote it under my mother's directives," Catherine countered, stepping forward despite Dick's frantic, low warning gesture. "And my mother knew you were greedy. The biometric token isn't just tied to my signature on my 25th birthday. It's hard-coded to a continuous genetic life signal. The moment my heart stops beating inside this manor, the entire Western Textile Fund doesn't default to a proxy. It automatically liquidates into a public global charity fund." Bruce activated the dead man trigger the second the perimeter was breached. Arthur went completely rigid, the clinical certainty in his eyes instantly fracturing into a wild, paranoid panic. "You're lying. She wouldn't have built that into the override." "Check your tablet, Arthur," a booming voice resonated from the top of the cellar stairs. Arthur and his mercenaries swung their weapons upward, but they were a split second too late. The heavy oak door at the top of the steps was torn off its hinges as Bruce Wayne charged into the cellar like a force of nature. His bespoke suit was torn, his knuckles bleeding, but his eyes radiated a terrifying, predatory power. He didn't just step down the stairs, he launched himself into the space. In that exact microsecond of total distraction, Dick Grayson moved. Dick lunged forward, his hand sweeping upward to strike the wrist of the first mercenary, forcing the automatic rifle to discharge harmlessly into the stone ceiling in a deafening spray of sparks and concrete dust. With a fluid athletic twist, Dick drove his elbow into the man's throat, sending him crashing backward into the second guard. Arthur, consumed by a sudden, desperate rage, swung his pistol back toward Catherine, his finger tightening around the trigger. "If I lose the Empire, you burn with it." Bang! A shot echoed through the tunnel, but it didn't come from Arthur's weapon. Christian Cullen stood at the top of the cellar stairs, leaning heavily against the brick archway for support. His face was entirely pale, his shirt soaked in dark crimson from his sniper wound, his hands shaking violently as he held a discarded security guard's pistol. He had dragged his dying, broken body through the house, driven by a final desperate urge to do one right thing in his pathetic life, to protect the wife he had so cruelly failed. The bullet struck Arthur squarely in the shoulder, knocking him violently sideways. The silenced pistol flew from his grip, clattering into the dark water pooling on the cellar floor. "Catherine!" Christian choked out, his vision tunneling as he collapsed onto his knees at the top of the steps, the weapon slipping from his fingers. "Run!" Bruce closed the distance instantly, his massive fist striking the remaining mercenary with a brutal, bone-shattering force that neutralized the threat permanently. He stood in the center of the subterranean corridor, his breathing heavy, his presence completely dominating the darkness. The turning point had been reached. The architects of the nightmare were broken, the false proxies were neutralized, and the bloodline was unified in the dark. Bruce walked over to Catherine, checking her pulse with an incredible, profound gentleness. "The bunker is secure, Catherine," Bruce said softly, his voice an anchor of absolute safety. "Alfred is inside. The medical team is ready. Let's bring the next generation of our family into a safe world." The damp, suffocating darkness of the underground tunnel pressed in from all sides. Arthur Sterling's flashlight beam danced across Catherine's pale face, casting long, monstrous shadows against the weeping concrete walls. "You always were too sentimental, Richard," Arthur murmured, his voice maintaining that soft, grandfatherly cadence that now made Catherine's skin crawl with pure revulsion. He leveled the silenced pistol directly at Dick's forehead. "Setting up a medical bay down here for her. A touching sentiment, but a completely futile one. Put her down on the floor gently. If you move so much as an inch toward your waistband, my associates will turn this cellar into a tomb." Dick slowly, deliberately lowered his weight, allowing Catherine's feet to touch the cold stone floor. He kept his body positioned slightly in front of hers, his muscles coiled like a steel spring, his eyes analyzing the mercenary positions with lethal calculations. He was looking for an opening, a fraction of a second, but with 2 automatic rifles and a pistol trained on them in a narrow bottleneck, the math was merciless. Catherine leaned heavily against the damp wall, her hands locked over her stomach. A sharp, localized cramp flared through her abdomen, but as she looked at Arthur, the man who had murdered her mother, who had stolen her childhood, and who was now standing in the dark trying to erase her baby's future, something inside her soul snapped. The paralyzing terror that had held her captive since the restaurant suddenly burned away, replaced by an ancient, unyielding Wayne fury. She stood up straight, pulling herself out from behind Dick's shadow. She looked Arthur dead in the eyes, her voice completely shedding its weakness, cutting through the damp chill like a razor blade. "You think you've won, Arthur?" Catherine whispered, a cold, defiant smile touching her lips. "You think killing me fixes the paper trail? Your lawyer. You forgot the first rule of a bloodline trust." Arthur's eyebrows knitted together in slight irritation, the barrel of his gun dipping a fraction of an inch. "I wrote the trust, Catherine. There is nothing you can tell me about its execution." "You wrote it under my mother's directives," Catherine countered, stepping forward despite Dick's frantic, low warning gesture. "And my mother knew you were greedy. The biometric token isn't just tied to my signature on my 25th birthday. It's hard-coded to a continuous genetic life signal. The moment my heart stops beating inside this manor, the entire Western Textile Fund doesn't default to a proxy. It automatically liquidates into a public global charity fund." Bruce activated the dead man trigger the second the perimeter was breached. Arthur went completely rigid, the clinical certainty in his eyes instantly fracturing into a wild, paranoid panic. "You're lying. She wouldn't have built that into the override." "Check your tablet, Arthur," a booming voice resonated from the top of the cellar stairs. Arthur and his mercenaries swung their weapons upward, but they were a split second too late. The heavy oak door at the top of the steps was torn off its hinges as Bruce Wayne charged into the cellar like a force of nature. His bespoke suit was torn, his knuckles bleeding, but his eyes radiated a terrifying, predatory power. He didn't just step down the stairs, he launched himself into the space. In that exact microsecond of total distraction, Dick Grayson moved. Dick lunged forward, his hand sweeping upward to strike the wrist of the first mercenary, forcing the automatic rifle to discharge harmlessly into the stone ceiling in a deafening spray of sparks and concrete dust. With a fluid, athletic twist, Dick drove his elbow into the man's throat, sending him crashing backward into the second guard. Arthur, consumed by a sudden, desperate rage, swung his pistol back toward Catherine, his finger tightening around the trigger. "If I lose the Empire, you burn with it." Bang! A shot echoed through the tunnel, but it didn't come from Arthur's weapon. Christian Cullen stood at the top of the cellar stairs, leaning heavily against the brick archway for support. His face was entirely pale, his shirt soaked in dark crimson from his sniper wound, his hands shaking violently as he held a discarded security guard's pistol. He had dragged his dying, broken body through the house, driven by a final desperate urge to do one right thing in his pathetic life, to protect the wife he had so cruelly failed. The bullet struck Arthur squarely in the shoulder, knocking him violently sideways. The silenced pistol flew from his grip, clattering into the dark water pooling on the cellar floor. "Catherine!" Christian choked out, his vision tunneling as he collapsed onto his knees at the top of the steps, the weapon slipping from his fingers. "Run!" Bruce closed the distance instantly, his massive fist striking the remaining mercenary with a brutal, bone-shattering force that neutralized the threat permanently. He stood in the center of the subterranean corridor, his breathing heavy, his presence completely dominating the darkness. The turning point had been reached. The architects of the nightmare were broken, the false proxies were neutralized, and the bloodline was unified in the dark. Bruce walked over to Catherine, checking her pulse with an incredible, profound gentleness. "The bunker is secure, Catherine," Bruce said softly, his voice an anchor of absolute safety. "Alfred is inside. The medical team is ready. Let's bring the next generation of our family into a safe world." The heavy steel blast doors of the lower medical bunker sealed shut with a deep, pressurized hiss, locking out the echoes of the violent war that had just raged through the upper foundations of Wayne Manor. Inside, the environment was a pristine, white sanctuary of state-of-the-art medical technology, running flawlessly on its independent localized power grid. Alfred Penny stood at the center terminal, calmly coordinating the estate's private trauma team. The moment Dick carried Catherine through the threshold, the specialized obstetric team went to work with swift, clinical precision. Catherine was placed onto the sterile bed, her body trembling violently from a volatile mix of severe physical exhaustion and adrenaline. The sharp, agonizing contractions that had gripped her abdomen in the damp cellar were escalating, the monitors rhythmically beeping to track a rapid high-stakes countdown of their own. "Her vitals are dropping, but the fetal heart rate is stable and strong," the lead physician announced, her voice calm but layered with immense urgency. "The stress has induced immediate active labor. Miss Catherine, you are safe now. The walls of this room are reinforced steel. Focus entirely on my voice. We are going to bring your baby out right now." Bruce Wayne stood just outside the glass partition of the medical bay, his torn, soot-stained midnight blue suit a stark testament to the brutal firefight he had just survived in the grand foyer. His chest heaved in slow, deep breaths as he watched the monitors. The mercenaries upstairs had been completely neutralized, stripped of their weapons, and bound in zip ties awaiting the federal authorities. Suddenly, a sharp, crimson notification flashed on Alfred's Central Command terminal. "Master Bruce," Alfred said, his voice dropping into a tight, hard register as he tapped the glowing glass screen. "The tactical jamming network Arthur deployed has fully collapsed. Our automated systems have completed the global data upload. But we have a final localized breach on the primary estate server room upstairs. Someone is trying to manually delete the forensic banking trail before the authorities can download the localized encryptions." Bruce's eyes narrowed into slits of pure, frozen steel. Arthur. Despite his shattered shoulder and the bullet wound inflicted by Christian's desperate shot, Arthur Sterling had somehow crawled his way out of the dark wine cellar, driven by the frantic, unhinged survival instinct of a cornered rat. He knew his legal career was dead, But if he could destroy the localized encryption keys housed in the Manor's primary server vault, the international shell companies would remain frozen in a legal limbo, allowing his hidden assets overseas to vanish into the dark web before they could be seized by the Wayne family trust. "I'll handle it," Dick Grayson said, stepping forward, his knuckles bruised, his firearm raised and ready. "No," Bruce commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried the absolute weight of a patriarch executing final judgment. "Stay here and guard Catherine. Arthur is my cross to bear." Bruce turned on his heel, his heavy leather boots clicking deliberately against the concrete floor as he exited the bunker, ascending back into the ruined, shadow-filled hallways of the upper manor. The grand foyer was a graveyard of broken marble, shattered crystal chandeliers and bullet-riddled tapestries. Bruce followed the faint, frantic sound of a keyboard clicking toward the secure records vault behind the library. He threw the heavy oak door open. Arthur Sterling stood slumped against the glowing blue server racks, his face pale and slick with sweat, his cashmere coat soaked in blood from his shoulder wound. In his right hand he held a sleek tactical flash drive, frantically trying to force an administrative wipe script through the master terminal. His left arm hung completely useless at his side. "It's over, Arthur," Bruce said, his voice dead, flat, and chillingly devoid of any human emotion as he stepped into the room. Arthur spun around, his eyes wild, bloodshot, and completely consumed by madness. He realized he couldn't complete the wipe in time. Dropping the flash drive, his trembling right hand plunged into his coat pocket, pulling out a small emergency glass vial filled with a highly volatile pressurized chemical incendiary, the exact type of compound used to spark the devastating textile estate fire 20 years ago. "You think you've won, Bruce?" Arthur shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate wail. "If I go down, I burn this entire archive to the ground. I'll erase the Wayne name from the registry. I built this empire while you sat in your brooding isolation. I deserve every dime of that trust." Arthur raised his hand, preparing to slam the chemical vial against the delicate, hypersensitive server electronics to ignite a catastrophic data-destroying inferno. But Bruce Wayne was no longer a passive observer of his family's tragedy. Driven by 20 years of grief and the fierce, unyielding need to protect the pregnant niece currently fighting for her life in the bunker below, Bruce closed the distance in a microscopic fraction of a second. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't fire a shot. With a swift, blinding display of martial mastery, Bruce grabbed Arthur's raised wrist, twisting it outward with a sickening, audible snap. Arthur screamed in pure agony, his fingers instantly losing their grip. Bruce caught the falling glass vial in his other hand a mere inch before it could strike the console, safely securing the volatile chemical. In the same fluid motion, Bruce drove his open palm hard into Arthur's chest, sending the elderly traitor crashing backward into the steel casing of the server racks. Arthur collapsed onto the floor, completely broken, his breath escaping his lungs in ragged, pathetic gasps as his vision began to fade. The master architect, the man who had pulled the strings of a lifelong conspiracy from the absolute dark, lay defeated at the feet of the empire he had tried so desperately to steal. Bruce slowly reached down, picking up the tactical flash drive Arthur had dropped. He slotted it into the terminal, his fingers executing a hardline override script that finalized the global distribution of Arthur's corporate crimes to every major financial regulatory agency in the hemisphere. The trap was permanently shut. The evidence was preserved. Justice had been delivered with absolute crushing finality. Down in the pristine white medical bunker, a sudden beautiful sound shattered the high-stakes tension of the room. The sharp, loud, and incredibly healthy cry of a newborn baby girl rang out through the speakers, cutting through the low hum of the medical monitors like a beacon of pure, unadulterated life. Catherine fell back against the pillows, her chest heaving, tears of profound, overwhelming joy streaming down her face as the physician gently placed the wrapped infant onto her chest. Skin against skin, the tiny child instantly stopped crying, her small fingers curling instinctively around Catherine's thumb. Dick Grayson let out a long, breathless laugh, a massive weight lifting from his shoulders as he leaned over the bed, his hand resting reassuringly on Catherine's arm. The long-lost heiress had survived the fire, survived the betrayal, and survived the wolves. She had given birth to the future of the Wayne dynasty inside an impenetrable fortress of love. Are you celebrating this absolute triumphant victory right now? The traitors have been crushed, the evidence is secured, and a beautiful new life has entered the world. Drop a comment below to share your joy for Catherine's incredible reclamation of power. And make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss our final, beautiful conclusion. The heavy metallic reek of smoke and gunpowder that had choked the grand corridors of Wayne Manor gradually melted away, carried out into the vast night sky by the cool, crisp mountain air. The violent storm that had threatened to erase the last remaining branch of the family line had finally passed, leaving behind a deep, healing and absolute stillness. Welcome back for the final, beautiful resolution, my friends. Before we bring this epic journey to its ultimate close, please take a quick moment to drop a comment below. Let me know how you felt seeing Catherine completely reclaim her power and birthright. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and share it with those who love a story where justice and family triumph over everything. Your incredible support keeps our community growing, and it allows us to bring these deeply emotional, high-stakes cinematic stories to life every single week. Now let's see how our heroes rebuild from the ashes. 6 months after that fateful, blood-stained morning, the brilliant golden rays of a perfect summer sun danced across the manicured lawns of a stunning, secluded estate on the southern coast. The air was filled with the sweet, crisp scent of blooming jasmine and the gentle, rhythmic whisper of ocean waves crashing against the cliffs below. Catherine sat in a beautifully carved wooden rocking chair on the sunlit veranda, a soft, radiant glow illuminating her face. She looked healthy, rested, and completely at peace. Cradled gently in her arms was her 6-month-old daughter, little Helena, who was fast asleep, her tiny face pressed contentedly against Catherine's linen dress. Catherine looked down at her daughter, her heart swelling with a profound, emotional depth of gratitude. The long, terrifying days of sitting in isolation at her former husband's house, feeling small, discarded, and gaslit by a cruel mistress, felt like a lifetime ago. The scars of that psychological manipulation had faded, replaced by an unyielding, grounded certainty in her own worth. She was no longer a victim hiding in the shadows. She was a mother, a protector, and the fully recognized director of the Wayne Family Humanitarian Trust. The heavy oak doors of the veranda swung open, and Bruce Wayne stepped out into the sunlight. He had traded his stark, imposing corporate suits for a comfortable, casual dark sweater. The sharp, guarded coldness that usually defined his eyes softened instantly the moment he looked at Catherine and the sleeping infant. He walked over to her side, leaning down to gently touch the baby's tiny, soft hand. Little Helena's fingers stirred in her sleep, instinctively curling around Bruce's thumb. A rare, genuine smile broke across the billionaire's weathered features. A smile of a man who had finally fulfilled a sacred vow to his departed sister. "Harvey just called from the federal district court," Bruce said softly, his deep voice carrying a comforting, absolute finality. "The final sentencing guidelines have been locked in. Arthur Sterling's asset forfeitures are complete. Every single shell company he used to orchestrate the textile fire and manipulate the trusts has been permanently dissolved. His name is officially erased from our legal legacy." Catherine let out a long, slow breath, a final lingering weight lifting entirely from her shoulders. "And Victoria Vance?" "The Vance Group filed for Chapter 7 liquidation last month," Bruce replied calmly. "Victoria attempted to flee the country to avoid the financial fraud indictments, but federal marshals intercepted her at the private terminal. She will be spending the next 15 years answering for her family's collusion with Sterling. She will never step foot in this high society circle again." "And Christian?" Catherine asked, her voice dropping to a quiet, reflective whisper. Christian Cullen had survived the sniper wound to his shoulder, but his corporate empire had been systematically dismantled into bankruptcy. Due to his final desperate act of bravery in the cellar, where he had taken a bullet to stop Arthur from pulling the trigger on Catherine, Bruce's legal team had quietly arranged for his medical expenses to be covered and his criminal charges reduced to probation. He had been permanently exiled from the city's financial elite, living a quiet, completely anonymous life upstate, entirely stripped of the wealth he had traded his soul for, left only with the bitter memory of the loyal, powerful wife he had failed to protect. Dick Grayson stepped out onto the veranda, holding a tray with fresh tea and a beautifully bound leather ledger. He looked vibrant, his effortless, aristocratic confidence radiating from his posture as he sat down on the steps beside them. The regional public housing developments built on the old Meridian Plaza site are officially breaking ground tomorrow, Catherine, Dick said, his eyes bright with deep respect as he looked at his relative. You did that. By shifting the trust funds away from commercial real estate and into public utilities, you're providing homes for thousands of families who actually need them. Your mother would be incredibly proud. Catherine looked out over the sparkling blue horizon of the ocean, her fingers gently tracing the smooth silver crest ring that sat proudly on her finger. She wasn't just holding a legacy of wealth, she was holding a legacy of resilience, honor, and love. She had been tested in the absolute darkest of fires, mocked by the wicked and abandoned by the weak. But she had emerged from the ash as a matriarch, surrounded by an unbreakable fortress of a family that would never let her stand alone again. We did it together, Catherine murmured softly, reaching up to press her hand against Bruce's arm, her eyes locking with his in a deep, timeless bond of familial devotion. The sun rose higher into the brilliant summer sky, painting the world in warm, vibrant shades of gold and amber. The secrets were laid bare, the wolves had been systematically destroyed, and the ultimate truth had finally prevailed. A new dawn had officially broken over the Wayne dynasty, a future filled with unyielding peace, profound love, and a family that was completely, beautifully whole.